Hello and good morning, everybody. Welcome to another exciting Land Effects webinar. My name is Jake, and I will be moderating this webinar. Today is a special one. We get to hear from Jeremiah Farmer, the CEO, the man behind the code of Land Effects. Going to be talking a little bit about wrapping CAD commands using AutoLISP. So, should be a pretty fun and interesting one. Few housekeeping items. This is being recorded, so if you want to check this out afterwards or missed a few things that he was doing, this will be recorded and posted onto our website no later than Monday, but definitely check that out. The Q&A, please click that button. We want your questions. We're happy to answer what we can, but that's got to be done through that Q&A button. So go ahead and click that, open that guy up, and have those questions ready to go. And the chat, feel free to use that for friendly banter, comments back and forth. That'd be great. Please definitely use the Q&A for your questions, though, so we can focus on getting those answered. But don't want to take up too much time, so that should wrap up what I need to say, Jer. So go ahead and take it away.
Awesome. Thanks, Jake. Good morning, everybody. Yeah, this is me, and boy, hard to believe it was that summer of '92. I was trying to actually think exactly when was that? Was it that I was trying to look and see? It might have been the summer of '91, and there was some things we were doing even the summer of 1990. But it was right in there when I first cracked that book of the customizing AutoCAD and started slinging AutoLISP code. So it's been a while. And the crux of that has been in maintaining land effects, some 180,000 lines of code, which doesn't sound that impressive, I will admit. I wish it sounds better, like 2 million lines of code, right? That sounds better. But, I'll just say it speaks to the efficiency of AutoLISP. So that's what it does. If anyone ever says, what can you do with Lisp? You can actually create a full up commercial application. So that's the power of it. This webinar is kind of in the fourth in this sort of informal series. So if you haven't seen these other ones, they are, up on YouTube and up on our Land Effects website. In the basics, really went into just discussing the language and your development environment. In that intermediate one, we got into more complicated functions and how to properly structure your code to go into the ribbon. And then in the advanced, even though really advanced is kind of quotes around it, we were able to show making an actual, very usable tool very quickly. So only a couple hours into that AutoLISP adventure, we were making a usable tool, and really speaks to how, frankly, approachable it is. It is definitely a very old and dated language, but its ability to be useful with AutoCAD it's amazingly easy to get going and make little tools. And we are approaching it from an angle of actually really maximum utility. But specifically for these other webinars, is it required to watch these to understand this webinar? No, I really tried to structure this so you don't necessarily need to have seen those first, but they're still definitely recommended if you're doing this AutoLISP journey. Today, we are talking about wrapping AutoCAD commands. Now, what the heck does that mean? Well, you may have noticed that many AutoCAD commands, in fact, pretty much all of them, seem to have all these little command line options. AutoCAD has this command line. Now, recall, AutoCAD came out before mice were even a thing. So that's the legacy of that command line. When it first came out, I think 1981, I believe. So several years before mice were around, and the only way to operate AutoCAD was via the command line. I mean, can you imagine every pan, every zoom, everything you do was literally typed at the command line. Now, what that means is, well, wait a minute, it's very easy to script that. And so we can control AutoCAD pretty much completely via just the command line. And AutoLISP is a command line interpreted language. And so it's very integrated with the command line. It can fire commands directly. It can interact with the command line. But a really cool thing, it can actually be running code while a command is active. And that's a little easier to comprehend once I actually show you an example of that. So we'll be seeing that really quickly. And what exactly does that mean? But what does wrapping an AutoCAD command give us? Well, for starters, it lets us make custom versions of commands that maybe are easy to remember, that strip away all the multiple options, just make it a really quick little thing. It's effectively a macro. Maybe we're going to process some input first before sending it to the command line. Maybe we want to just toggle system variables. So, as you think to yourself, gee, what are some commands that, like, for instance, if you have a sticky note stuck to your monitor telling you how to, the multiple options to do when doing some complex command. Hey, let's wrap that into a custom command, right? Or anything like that. If you find yourself hovering over the F8 key so you can be constantly toggling ortho mode while you work, well, maybe we can find a way to take care of that automatically. So that's how we can effectively make CAD yours, and that's what we're going to be doing today. So one last note, like Jake said, this is being recorded. Also, all the files that I show, they will be available with the webinar when it's posted to the website. So if you wanted to see all those code files. Also, some 30 years into looking at code, it's very possible at any point I might be going a little too fast for you. Use that Q&A box. The quicker you can say slow down, just simply in the Q&A box, is going to be helpful to me. It's always a risk when showing these technical things. I'm so used to staring at code, it's possible I might go too fast for you. So just please let me know if that ever is the case. But I think got this at a nice little pace for you. So let's kind of get going. We'll start with the most basic, and that is just simply making a keyboard shortcut to fire a complex command. That's it, right? So we can use AutoLISP to do anything from setting variables automatically to help with that, because that might be the only kind of moving part in this equation. And then just one thing I want to point out first, before showing these, is you'll notice these underscores and periods always in front of commands and arguments. And that is a very good thing to get to the habit of. That forces English language support. So this code can run on any install of AutoCAD worldwide, no matter what language pack is installed. So obviously the purge command is not called purge in Spanish, right? So we use the underscore to force it into English mode. Then the period, so you can see in this command for purge, the underscore is forcing it to English. Then the period is forcing the internal definition of that command, which is, so that one's maybe not so necessary, but you get to a habit of it, best practices, blah, blah, blah. But what does that mean? Technically, there is an ability to undefine any command in AutoCAD. And it's never really recommended. Why would you do that to people? So it's just kind of preparing for that in case someone, for whatever reason, some overzealous CAD manager said, "You guys are purging too much. I'm going to undefine the purge command." I don't know, but it's just simply a best practice thing, and so that's what those are. So we'll start with this really basic example here at the bottom. This is straight from LandFX. This is the PRG command. And so look at how simple this is. So we have an AutoLISP function definition. That's the defun. We're defining a function. And the C colon prefix is defining it as a command. So that means I can fire this function by typing whatever is after the C colon, which is just PRG. So I don't need to prefix it with parentheses or anything, even though, see, AutoLISP is all about parentheses. Everything is bounded by parentheses. But when I define with a function with C colon, I can just simply type PRG at the command line. And in case you ever wondered, well, what is that PRG command in LandFX? Well, it's pretty simple. This is literally it. Repeat 4 times, and we fire a command. And this is how it's done. This is how AutoLISP can fire a command to the command line. So it's the command function. So we're firing the hyphen definition of purge. Now, if you simply got to look in the documentation. So when you're trying to do this, you pull up the documentation for the purge command, and there you'll see there's a hyphen purge, which is the command line only version, no dialog box. So it obviously that would be the preferred version to use if you're trying to script it from AutoLISP. So we just want to fire the purge command, A for all, and again, that underscore is confirming it's the English version of the arguments, A for all. The empty double quotes is the same as in just enter. So we're saying purge all, enter. I actually can't recall what the enter was for, and then no to confirm. So that's just simply a purge all, and it does that 4 times, right? Just by simply typing PRG. Now, some people, of course, without this would go, well, I just type purge, the dialog box pops up, and I click purge all 3 or 4 times. Sure. Yeah, I mean, totally valid, right? But this is just simply a quick little shortcut that's a little faster. It's easier for us, certainly, over tech support, we can say type PRG at the command line. They type it. Okay, we know things have been purged. If we say type purge and the dialog box pops up, did you click the button 4 times, right? It's just a little less error prone. And obviously, command line is all about the speed and efficiency. So it's just a simple shortcut, and this is just simply the shortest and simplest example I could bring up first. Let's get to these a little more advanced, but still in the same vein. This is also showing how you should best organize your code. So you see, I have my shortcuts defined at the top. So I want XXX to fire my export wrapper, and I want EEE to fire my eTransmit wrapper. And I have these at the top of my code. So that way, if I want to change that shortcut, maybe someone goes, oh, I like EEE for something else, all those shortcuts are defined at the top and very easy to edit. And then you can just leave your function names however you wish. And then even these function names, that's how the convention is among us AutoLISP programmers, is you prefix the function with a couple of letters, 2 or 3 letters and a colon. Usually it's like your initials or your firm acronym or whatever. For all of ours, we use FX, which is very similar to XX. But so that way, it just helps to prevent any name collision. Because if I didn't do the XX prefix, it's possible, that there could have been some other AutoLISP code that defined the function export wrapper. And so just to avoid, redefining someone else's function, you want to make sure it has a unique name. And so that convention in our industry is that little prefix. But look at this export wrapper. Again, obviously dominated by firing the command export to AutoCAD with all of its silly, silly settings. I mean, do you really expect a user to enter these at the command line? No. They can't realistically think that you're going to do that. But look at how easy it is to script. And so as this little wrapper, of course, we can mix and match AutoLISP code and command line. So we have just a little snippet of code here, which is we do need that file name. So we can have any code that we want here. It could be automatically set to some combination of the current drawing name and today's date, for instance. It could be specifying a certain path. It could pull up a prompt and ask the person even, whatever it is, the sky's the limit with writing code, whatever you need. But of course, the crux of this is firing this perfect example of a command you would want to wrap. Look at all these. And again, this is how you should structure it. I have it splayed out over multiple lines like this. Very clear that this is the command and this is where it ends. Very easy to read. And I have comments for all of the options. So it's very easy to maintain. Obviously, I can just simply go to the AutoCAD command line. I can type this, and then I can confirm that these are the right options in the right order that I want. And then if I want to make changes, of course, for instance, I want to make a version that does include XREFs. Obviously, look at how easy that is. I already have it noted. Same for the eTransmit wrapper, same basic thing. Very complex, but a great example of that. Let's say, for instance, you need to send this drawing package to the client every Friday, and this client wants it all down converted to a certain version DWG, less common these days, but it could still happen. That is an option in the transmit command. It can convert all drawings. So maybe you're just tweaking that command, and again, making it very specific. So you just have a quick little keyboard shortcut, boom, kicks out your whole drawing set with those preferred options. Really easy to do. And again, the only little bit of Lisp that you're getting into is, well, it does specify a path. Maybe it's just simply a hard-coded path right here. That'd be fine. But maybe there's some logic to setting that path, and you have that capability. So, right, really easy, and that is the simplest, best example of wrapping CAD commands. I mean, we could end right there. Like, this is totally viable, usable. You could use this again and again, but let's keep going with some other cool uses. This one is notable. This is what I have seen is by far the most common implementation of wrapping AutoCAD commands, and that is wrapping the mleader command. And for a very hilarious reason that I won't get into here. But as I think you probably all know, but as we get in, we're wrapping the mleader command. Well, there's a lot of things with wrapping the mleader command, and obviously this is just a snippet of code, and I'm going to dive into CAD and show you this. But so we start out, we're going to set our variable P1 to a point. We want to prompt the user for a point. So we prompt for an arrow point. So we got the point first, just in straight AutoLISP. And so now we can set our desired mleader style name, because perhaps the point was relating to the style name. But the important one is I set my current mleader style active, and that's how you do it. It's just a system variable. So this is how you set a system variable. And so we're setting it to this variable, which, like I said, that's the missing bit here. How was that style derived? Obviously, might be more code, might be hard coded. But that's the beauty, is I could have a shortcut that all I want is to set my current my desired mleader style active. I like to turn ortho mode off for specifying my arrow. Classic example, maybe you prefer polar mode. You could set polar mode and set polar to every 15 degrees if that's what you want to kind of enforce that. I mean, this is a perfect example of what you could do with it. But now we're wrapping the mleader command. And so we're doing a few things with that. First, we specify H for head first, head or arrow, more commonly, because with the mleader command, it can be set to content first and then arrow second, which is super annoying to people who aren't expecting that. And so you have to specify H to guarantee that that's set to the arrow first mode. Then we can feed it that first point that we acquired up here. And now here's this cool reserved word in AutoLISP, pause. And that's literally going to pause for user input for that second point of that leader arrow. And then look at this command function ends. Now here's the crazy cool part about doing this in AutoLISP. Even though this function ends, the command is still active at this point. You can absolutely do that. So even though we fired to the command line, we started the mleader command, we got it going, we fed it a point, we waited for the second point, and even though this ends, that command is literally just sitting there at the command line and is active. And what did we do? All we wanted to do was turn ortho mode on for the landing. 100%, that's all we wanted to do. And then we can come back to command, throw another pause to the command line, pausing for the landing distance. And then now the mtext box will have focus. The user enters their mtext, and that's just kind of just sitting there. And so again, notice how I'm literally just reading comments, and that is 100% how good code is organized. Is you are reading it by I don't read the code, I read the comments. So I'm always just looking at the comments, and so that's why good comments are so imperative. But anyway, so the mtext box has the focus here while they type the mtext, and then when they click out of it, now the command ends. And I did an inflection on purpose. Is the mleader command done? there's a pause here and there's a pause here. We kind of don't know. We really don't know if the mleader command ended. It did end successfully, and so we need to test. There's no way to guarantee, and so we do this. We check the system variable command active. If that system variable is greater than 0, then the command is still active. Well, we know darn well what command it is. It's the mleader command. We fired it. So it's still active. Oh, oops. I don't know what happened, but we were pausing for input while a live command was active. The user could have technically entered any valid input that the command was expecting. So they could be in a weird part of the command. And so we just fire an empty command, which is the equivalent of the escape key. It just cancels out of that command. And so then, of course, okay, we got to figure out what's going on. Maybe say some sort of error or something to the user. But let me show you what this looks like in operation. So that is, like I said, that is straight up. That is a snippet of code from our mleader wrapper right here. So I click on him, and you can see it's arrow point. That is that first line of Lisp code, that get point call. So it's just simply a straight AutoLISP get point. Once I click that, now it's another get point call or I'm sorry, what am I saying? It's the mleader command. So you can see after that first get point call, it fired the mleader command. I mean, how cool is that? So now the mleader command is active. We specified H, which is an invalid input because it's already set to header first, H first. You just gonna have to live with that. But now here's that pause. So it's sitting there and it's literally pausing. So this is that command pause, pausing for my second point. Once I click my second point, remember now it's set ortho mode. Now ortho mode is on. And so there we go. Ortho mode is locked in. I can specify my landing distance, and then boom, now that M text box is up. I'm entering, and so now there's nothing happening while that is firing. And then once I click out of that, everything wraps up. Now, and the reason why I said it's kind of almost ironically hilarious, all this code is, gee, shouldn't that just simply be in the mleader style that the landing distance is always orthogonal? Yeah, of course it should. But hey, well, whatever. Let's just code around that. But like I said, I see this on the forums all the time. So it just is indicative of, frankly, how many mleaders people place in CAD. But yeah, it's all about they just want that landing distance orthogonal. And so this is the way to do it. And again, that's not a lot of code is what's great. I mean, look at that. I mean, you could get this up and running in a day with very little knowledge, and you'd no longer have to be with your left hand hunched over the keyboard, constantly hitting F8 on and off while you're placing mleaders. Our next example, now here's a good example of wrapping an AutoCAD command for efficiency of code, laziness. I don't know how you would call it. We have these existing AutoLISP functions, get point to get a point, and get corner prompts for 2 points that will make up a rectangular boundary. But what if we want a whole list of points? I want a point list. I want a get plist function. Of course, it's fun to call it get plist, but it's technically get plist. So I want a prompt for the user to select a polygonal point list. It could even be just a path, but it's notionally a list of points that will be used to create a polyline or to maybe feed to the zoom command or something like that. I just simply need a list of points from the user. While I'm prompting for that list of points, it would be nice to see what they entered. So I want to see a temporary red notional polyline list while they're clicking. So why don't we just literally wrap the polyline command as a way to do that? And so that's literally what this does. So this is my get plist function. You can see the crux of it is regarding wrapping the P-line command right here. And again, see how, I mean, with purposeful white space, indentation, all making this very, very clear. Obviously, this is the P-line command, and here's where the enter ends it. And inside is a while loop. We're just simply wrapping the polyline command, but we do a couple things. Specifically, I'm turning off command echo because I don't want people to see that I'm wrapping the polyline command. I want them to just think I'm prompting for a boundary path. And to even make it more clear, we're going to set the current entity color to red so they get that nice red look. And then, of course, at the end, we have to set those back. But the crux of this is wrapping the polyline command. So let's go through this. So while what? While and these things are true. So first, we're setting our point X to, setting it to an if statement, okay? If point X exists. So let's just go through this. The first time we go through, point X is nil. It hasn't been defined yet. So while we set point X to if point X exists, it doesn't exist. So that means we set it to the second argument here, which is start point. Okay, so the first time through, it prompts for start point. It's now set to the start point. Does point X equal C? Well, no, it equals the start point. So great. So we can continue. Oh, we're going to start building our point list. Our point list, the whole point of this function is to return that point list. That's all we want. So we're building our point list. Oh yeah, almost as an afterthought, we better feed that point to the command line as well so it can build this notional polyline. So now we loop. Now the second time through, point X does exist. So now it's going to be this prompt to prompt for next point, and it'll show me a rubber band from the prior one. Or, of course, the user might click C. And so if they click C, it'll bounce. But until they click C or right click, it'll keep looping. It'll build my point list, keep feeding that polyline command until they right click or press C. Then there's a little bit of cleanup, which is basically making sure that they did click enough points. We just say as long as it's at least one. And then, of course, the important thing, we have to delete that polyline. That would be nice, right? You know what? That's the whole point. We got to pull that thing out of there. So we delete the polyline. If they did press C, I go ahead and take the first point and tack it onto the end. So just simply quote unquote closing it by making the first point the last point as well. If it was not, if of course there was no point list, setting it to nil, or it's for only one point, whatever, that's silly. There's no such, I want a point list, not one point. But pretty rare someone would only click one point and then try to cancel out. But anyway, that being said, let's go ahead and see what this one looks like. So that is, it's a helper function in here, most quickly accessed by the new work area tool. So let me just do a work area and click OK. And here we are. So first point, it's exactly that line of code, prompting for first point. So I click for first point and it wants the next point. So it's showing me my rubber band. And then boom, look at that. You don't even see the polyline command is active, but the polyline command is active right now. That's all we're doing. And then there's my little close to end. And so this one's also a little ironic in that we drew a polyline to delete a polyline to then recreate a polyline with the exact same point list. Trust me, there's a method to the madness, but like I said, I might have wanted that polyline, that point list for something other than creating a polyline. But there's also other things we could have been doing in there, of course. A classic is, right here, we got the point and we're assembling the point list and sending it back to the command line, right? There's a very important thing we could have done here. We could rip the Z elevation value out of that point. We could have rounded it to a nearest round value or something. We could do anything we want in filtering or massaging that point as necessary. And so that's the whole another huge benefit with these wrapping these commands is it's the normal command, but it gives me total control of kind of sanitizing that input. So you guys ready for the next one? How about Xcopy? This is one of my favorites, hands down. You may be aware of the express tool command mocoro. And okay, maybe you agree with me. That is one of the stupidest possible command names in the world. I'm never going to remember that. And because especially because I'm not going to remember the M. I still don't really what is I think M stands for multiple. What is it? What the? It's copy. It's an advanced copy. I think of it. I just think of MS-DOS and it had the copy command and then the X copy command. And to me that makes sense. And so you want an advanced copy. It should be called X copy, not Mocoro. And the other thing that's annoying with Mocoro is you have to indicate every time you use it if you want to copy or copy and rotate. And I'm like, this is totally stupid. You should have an X copy command that is just set to copy. And if you really want a copy and rotate, then either use Mocoro or you can use, we came up with Xcoro, which, still, I don't know. I think Coro is probably the best for copy and rotate, is probably what it should be. But anyway, I'm just focused on the X copy. So like I said, even though Mocoro can rotate, I want an X copy version of Mocoro that only copies. And that's what this does. And we do a couple cool things here. So in order to fire the Mocoro command, we need a couple things. We need our objects that we're going to copy, and we need our base point, right? That's it. That's all we need. We need source objects and base point. And then we need to prompt for the second point, the second copy point. So cool things of how I do that. So first, I want to assemble the things we need. So if and we want to assemble our things. But look at this, an SS get I, that's an implied selection, otherwise known as just simply current selection, objects which are currently selected. The Mocoro command supports pre-selecting objects, so we should too. So first of all, if the following is true, if we can grab an implied selection, we're going to use that. If not, or we're just going to prompt for a selection. And so now the user has selected objects to copy. Great. We now prompt for the base point. That's another good example. Maybe we could look at look at the objects they selected and automatically construe a base point, but obviously the user might want a very specific base point, and so it's probably just best to simply prompt for that. Okay, so we have our objects, we have our base point. Now we can loop. Obviously, the first time we loop, exit flag is not true. So we're obviously going to go the first at least once. And interestingly, look at how I chose to wrap this. So obviously, the Mocoro command can make copies all day long, but we're going to do it in a one-off fashion. But other things before we get to the one-off, I look at how I start the command Mocoro. And then I immediately go, wait a minute, is the command line active? If it's not, if it's 0, if the command line is not active, that means one and only one thing. And that means that this Mocoro command, even though it was prefixed English internal version, failed. And that would just simply mean that Express Tools is not installed. And so that's a classic thing to check for, certainly in a case like this. If you're firing an Express tool, so granted, could I do that differently? I could check for Express Tools in a different manner. Sure. I could move this farther up. I could just fire Mocoro initially, and then immediately bomb out if it's not a valid command. Sure, I could do that. I chose to just add this one line of code right here. So okay, we've got the command active. So now we're going to feed to the command line our selection of our objects and then enter. So that's our selection. We feed it our base point to copy. We say, yes, I want to copy, stupid command line option, and we pause for our one copy. And then the interesting thing about Mocoro is I have to click X twice to exit. So I click X once, and then now, just like the notes say, if they clicked a point, the command is still active and is waiting for one more X. If they right-clicked, like if it was the second time this went, they could have right-clicked for this pause. in which case it didn't need that X. So in case didn't need this one either. So there's two exits necessary to get out of the Mocha row command. And so that's why I check for the command line active to necessarily send a second X. Or if they right clicked, it's going to bounce to here, set my exit flag to true. So when we loop back, exit flag is true, and we loop. So what does that look like? Let's find out. We go over here, X copy. So you can see there's my generic prompt, select objects. So I'll just grab him, base point, sure. So you can see it fired Mocha row, said C to copy. It's the pause right now, it's pausing. And so look at that though. Even though it looks like it's one Mocha row command, notice, see, it exited completely out and fired Mocha row again, fed the objects back, fed the base point back, set it to copy again, and paused for that next point. Each time it's firing Mocha row again until I finally right click and then it bounces out. And so you might very understandably go, why? Why wouldn't you just let it keep going in the same command? And for this case, it was a classic example because it's this little white space area right here. Right here, there's no command active. I copied these objects once and only once. And so right here, I can process those objects. I can have some additional logic, make sure that they're good, do whatever I need to, right? Update a label, update a quantity, whatever it is, so that I can basically access those entities and do what I need to do while a command is not active. And so it just worked best to wrap this in this manner. So it's a classic example of a very, frankly, kind of an advanced wrapping of an AutoCAD command. I hope I'm not losing everybody. What do you think, Jake? Everybody following along?
Oh, we haven't had any questions, if that's what you're saying. We do have some people asking about where they go to maybe go a little more basic. And so I passed them over the three videos that you referenced from the beginning of this little guy here. So um, please use that Q&A so that I can actually paste some links in there for you guys to reference.
Absolutely. Yes. Yeah. So yeah, just definitely don't want to have to keep repeating the most basic stuff in every webinar. So this is, like I said, tactically in the series, but I'm trying as best as possible to keep very
We
basic code and go as slow as I can here.
we did get Chris saying this is great, Jeremiah. So
Okay.
you
Oh,
people
Chris,
are
good man.
following along. So
All right.
keep
Well, so
going.
let's go on to some tips. As you've clearly seen again and again, I'm checking if command is active. Um, and so, here's the two, basically very similar examples of that. I'm firing a command, I feed it a couple of points, I immediately go, hey, is the command still active? And then, oh, if it is, whatever, maybe good, maybe it's a good thing. It could be a good thing, could be a bad thing, but it's just, I need to check, is the command still active? You have to do this. There's no other indication. I mean, for instance, it could have bombed out after this first argument. And so if, for instance, let's say P1 was nil, right? Or, whatever, it was some illegal value. And so it bombed the command out. If the command ended right there, this is still firing. So you just threw the second argument to the command line. If that second argument was something like, say, the letter P, it would fire the pan command. Literally, it will literally do that because that's what you said. You said command line P. That's exactly what you said. So you have to do these command actives. You're kind of trying to guess with your tea leaves and your sensing rocks. Is the command still active? Okay, then continue. Can you get a little too overzealous and have every single one of these interspersed by checking for command active? Probably, but there's some key ones that you would want to do. And here's the other version of the same thing. I fire some command. Is the command line active 0? That's, same way of saying, is the command line inactive? If the command line is inactive, oh no, that means that this bombed out. This didn't even fire. A classic example of that one, doing it really quickly for that, the hatch command. You fire the hatch command, you feed it a pattern file that doesn't exist. Hatch command just bombs out completely. So it's nice to check to make sure the command line is still active. Or if it's inactive, however, it's whatever you're testing for your case. But the other one was the int last function. So this is another classic example. I set my variable last int to the last entity in the model, which is the most recently created entity is the int last. So it's really int recent, but it's int last is the last entity created in the drawing. And so then I try to fire my image attach. So I'm firing image, attach, my file name, I pause for location, I pause for scale, I say 0 rotation, and then I go, hey, by the way, does that variable last int, is it equal to now int last? Now, if it is, if this variable equals the last entity in the drawing, then that means the image attachment failed. So that's a very classic way of testing if a command succeeded. Is just simply grabbing int last and then seeing if that int last is still int last. And if it is, then that failed, and then in the case I can exit. Now you may notice, oh, that was an exit and before I just did an empty command. It all depends on your code, on what you're doing. Like I said, an empty command will just simply cancel the active command. But in this case, that would be silly because this command is probably not even active if it failed. But so, it all depends on what in the command question, what is going to be the best thing to test for. And just in this case, it was determined it's best to just simply test if the entity is still there. But as for what an exit will do compared to a command, exit will just bomb completely out and stop all AutoLISP code. So it is a ejection seat out. And so if it all depends on what code follows, if you're going to account for the fact that the image didn't attach, obviously you'd want to still have your code executing. But exit will just simply bomb completely out. You also want to be wary of system variables that will affect the order of the prompts. Very important. Here's a classic one, is the expert system variable. When I'm trying to fire the block command to make a block, if that block name already exists, it will prompt, do you want to overwrite? Yes, no. And so I'd have to put a Y here. So there's a couple ways to do this, of course. I could put an if statement. I could say, if the block exists, use this version of the command line. Otherwise, use this one. I don't like that one personally. These command line calls to me are essentially chiseled in stone. It takes so much effort to get it perfect. I like to have just one command call in the code, and I will have the other code ensure that that's the correct one. So if it means setting expert mode to 1 so that it will not prompt if the block name exists, if it means deleting an existing file so that the save command won't prompt overwrite, whatever it is, I prefer a single code for a single line of code for firing a command. And then, of course, always set that system variable back when you're done. Del objects is the other one. You're really only going to run against this with the region command. And so because of that, this is how I like to do it, is whenever I fire the region command, write the line of code directly above it. I will expressly set the del object setting that I want for this usage. So in this case, it will delete the original. So when I pass that entity to convert it to a region, it will delete that polyline, and now only there will be a region that exists. Other tips, take note that when you're feeding a point like this, when I'm feeding this point to any command, It's at the command line, so that means it needs to be user coordinate. So I have another example of that in a second, but you always have to be wary of that depending on how you got that point, how you derived it. Anything at the command line is in UCS. Also, you have to be very wary of O snaps, ortho, any of that. You are firing a command. All those things are possibly active. So if you're scripting a certain command, like if you're trying to create a polyline and you're just saying polyline and you're feeding it points, if O snaps are active, those will apply, and those points won't be the points that you fed to it if they snap with to something. So you're going to want to turn those off. And then lastly, even though we're not able to really get into it with this webinar, is the escape handler. That's the other one. People love pressing escape. The problem is pressing escape will bomb out of the command and it'll also bomb out of your code. And so if you had, for instance, a temporary object or you had some system variables set a certain way, it's bad form to leave it set that way just because they pressed escape. So a future webinar is going to go into escape handling. To go into that subject more. But for now, you just want to be wary of it. And when I say kind of, what do you mean by being wary of? These are things to test. These are things to test. So, when you're testing this code, what happens when you press escape? Okay, just be sure you test it. What happens when O snaps are turned on, when ortho's turned on? And you just need to test those things. And you, as best as possible, you account for them. Now I'm going to really break your brain. Really sorry to do this. This is the worst part, but there are 3 different ways to fire a command from AutoLISP. Luckily, you're primarily using the plain Jane normal one, or whatever you want to call it. Good old command, good old buddy command. And the beauty, it's just so flexible. It's so wonderful. I mean, it still just blows me away that I can start a command and the command line is actually still active. And so I can loop through a point list and I can feed it the first point in the point list, and I can trim that off and I can keep looping until all these points are done. I mean, this is just a real basic, programming loop. It's a real basic little while loop, but I'm sending things to the command line while a command is active. To me, it boggles the mind because I don't know, you have this assumption that when a command is active, it has all focus and no other code is running. That's why it's just so wild. So it's very flexible in that way. However, there's some cases where you can't use a command function, and that's where these other 2 come in. So with 2015, Autodesk did probably the most substantial rewrite of AutoCAD since arguably 2000, 2004. They rewrote the entire graphic subsystem of AutoCAD for 2015. And it had a major effect with AutoLISP. And so with that, they also came out with Command S. The S stands for subroutine. Um, I don't get it, but whatever, it works. But each one is in its own subroutine. So what does that mean? One of the things it means is it can be called from the error handler that I briefly mentioned. However, by 2015, I'd already been doing this for 20 years. So I already knew it's very bad form to fire a command from the error handler. So I just never do it. I don't see when that would ever be necessary. So I think this is whatever. Who would ever want to fire a one-off command from an error handler? I think usually it's for one and only use, and that's to set the undo marker. But again, I mean, it's just a really weak use case. The real use case is because it's related to that graphical overhaul. So if you need to get access to the updated screen contents, you have to use Command S. And the best example is the one right here you're seeing, is I want to do a crossing polygon of a point list. So I want to grab all the objects within a certain crossing polygon. Well, a nuance of that is if you are not zoomed to that polygon, it will not work correctly. You have to zoom to that location first. And then, of course, you might say, well, why not just zoom extents? Really? Please don't ever. You don't want to zoom extents because that'll probably fire a regen and it'll zoom out to the whole universe and fire a regen and it's going to annoy users. So you try to just strategically, I want to just zoom to a window that contains all of these points, fire my line of code, and then zoom previous. Very, very simple, right? Um, but the thing is this will work. um, I cannot use command for that. If I use command, these zooms will not happen until all AutoLISP code is done. Don't ask me why they did it this way, but they did. But I'm just saying that when you need to do this, when you need the screen updated before your next line of code from a command call, you have to do it with Command S. The other thing, though, Command S can't do, it can't do this. Each one is its own subroutine. It's its own little fiefdom. So once I start this command, there's nothing I can do to add more parameters to it. I cannot access that command line again. So they're their own little fiefdoms. Whereas this one, I started the command and I can feed commands back to it. It's so flexible. Lastly is the Visual Lisp Command F. I do not know what the F stands for. I've tried finding, I cannot figure it out. But this is just another flavor, the Visual Lisp command line. Basically, it's very, very similar to Command S. The one thing, it evaluates all arguments first, which I don't understand the utility of that. If you're not already sanitizing your inputs, you're not a good programmer. I mean, you should already be making sure that all those arguments are valid before you send them to the command line. It makes no sense to validate them by sending them to the command line. So that's, even though they say that's what it does, there would never be a use case for that. What I like it for is it's very quiet, it's very fast, and it does not echo anything to the command line. So it's particularly good for what I would call noisy commands. And pedit is a great example. Man, that's a noisy command. It's going to tell you every vertex that it found and how many ones were illegal and blah, 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 blah. And users don't like seeing that. So if you just want to quickly, quietly decurve a polyline without the user thinking that's what happened, here's your answer right there. Boom. But now I want to kind of end with the cool thinking to the future, because basically there's only so far you can go with wrapping these AutoCAD commands because you really want to make your work pop. You need a graphical interface. And at the simplest, you need this. You need a yes/no box. That is not built into AutoLISP, and that sure is handy. That first example I showed, the e-transmit wrapper and the export wrapper, would be really nice to say, are you ready? Are you ready to e-transmit? Yes or no? Just that. Wouldn't that be a nice pop? Well, here's how to do it. It's very easy to do. You're going to install OpenDCL runtime. So I'm going to pull this up and show it to you. So here's OpenDCL. You don't need the studio. We're going to cover dialog boxes in a future webinar. You just need the runtime. You want the current build. You want this guy right here. And the reason why I'm showing you is specifically because of this. When you click on that, it's going to go to SourceForge. I just don't like SourceForge, but trust the process. It says your download will start. There we go. It downloaded. Just don't click anything on here. SourceForge has been just horrible, horrible with having ads that say, click here to download. And so people click that and they download some other thing. So it's just, I don't like SourceForge. I'm sorry. But you see, this download button is the correct link. But you see, it took forever to appear. In the meantime, like you saw, there was ads in the past, they've been worse. Like this one here, that is not starting your download, is what I'm saying. So that's why it's like, I just say, don't click anything and let it download automatically. But anyway, once that's downloaded and installed, all you need to do is fire the command OpenDCL. And you could just simply do it once. So you could do it on startup. That would work, or you can do it right before you're going to use it. That's fine. But in this, I just want a simple little function. I'm going to fire specifically the DCL message box function, which just simply takes some text. You can also have a title text if you want. Mode 5 is for a yes, no. They also have an OK cancel and other ones. But I just want a simple yes, no. And then if they click yes, it returns 6. So is this message box returning 6, true or false? That's all this is. So that way in usage, I can do something this simple. If confirm box, are you sure? And it looks like this. That was so easy. And look at how sexy that is. Adding that to your little command wrappers, come on, everyone in the office is going to love you. But that, of course, does bring up, well, what about other dialog boxes? So I can end with a little bit of this real quick, get you excited about dialog boxes. So scale by reference, another classic one where the command line is so challenging to scale by reference. It's all at the command line. What it needs, there's nothing we can do to wrap it. We need a dialog box. So I'll run you through this one a little quick, just because we're getting to the end, but this is the last thing to show. But so to scale something by reference, I need the object to scale. So I prompt select an object. I grab all that object's information. I need now selecting existing reference. So I get my first reference point, my second reference point. I do some math on what was selected. Now I can show a dialog box. Obviously, there's about 100 lines of code behind there. That's a future webinar on dialog boxes. But don't worry, I'm still going to show you how cool this is. Then if the user enters a distance, now I can wrap my command. And here's just basically wrapping the scale command. Remember how I said OSNAP will mess up your day? Here's how you turn OSNAP off. So log how it's set currently and just turn it completely off. Then I can fire the scale command for the object that was selected. Here's that point, the base point, where I just go, I'm just going to use the base point of that object, which is what? Base point of that object is in world coordinate. This is how we translate into user. So we have to translate that point into user. I want to scale by reference for those 2 points, that distance. Even just looking at this, I'm like, that is an insane series of things that you expect someone to enter at a command line. Let's see how that looks with a dialog box. Let's go ahead and get rid of my mess here. Scale by reference, select my object. We saw that prompt, boom. Now select existing reference distance. I have my 2 points. My 2 points was right here and right here. Now I get my snazzy little dialog box. Now that's going to impress your coworkers. Now, isn't that easier? Is it this easier to scale something? I clicked the object. I said these 2 points. I get the visual feedback of a dialog box showing me, well, that was the distance it is now. Oh, I even have a help link if I want to see documentation. Well, it's supposed to be 20 feet. And I say go, and you see, zoomed it, and then it tells me it's done. Boom, just like that. And we can judge by the existing car block, it's the correct size. So that is how cool it can be. And again, neglecting the code required for the dialog box, not a lot of code, but talk about how much easier this is to simply scale a PDF. And that is not a complex dialog box. So when we get into dialog boxes, that's literally the dialog box that we're going to go over. We're going to start with. It only has one thing on there, just the width. So obviously it's a great one to start with. So yeah, so that was scale by reference. Pretty cool, huh? Oh, you've come to the end. I'm so sorry. But thank you guys for attending. Certainly would be happy to answer any questions if anything pops into your brain real quickly. But while you're thinking and maybe hammering a quick question, we'll remind you, yes, this has been recorded. It'll be up on the website along with all the source code that you saw. That'll all be available for download with it. And yes, we need to have a follow-up. I think on dialog boxes would be absolutely the next one. So I guess no one has any good questions. I think I wowed you enough. I hope. I hope you aren't just like, was all Greek to me. I hope it helped. Continue your AutoLISP journey. Really is a fantastically fun language with a lot to offer. So best of luck with your journey, and we will see you on the next webinar in this series. All right, guys. Thanks much. Have a good weekend.